Imagine the silence of the night. A quietness has spread everywhere. A time when people are sleeping deeply in their homes, with their children, with their loved ones, thinking they're safe within the four walls of their house. But the people of this city did not know that a fear was prowling amongst them. A fear that would enter their homes in the darkness of the night and leave a mark of its presence in blood. This is the story of a mysterious killer, a person who had frightened the people of New Orleans even in the daylight. The world gave it a name that is still spoken with fear. It is called the Axeman of New Orleans. It all began in the year 1918. New Orleans, famous for its jazz music, its colorful streets, and its cultural vibrancy, suddenly began to become a center of terror and horror. The people living in this city had been living their lives with joy and freedom until then. But then suddenly the situation took such a turn that a shadow of fear became visible on every person's face. People would lock their doors at night, fasten their windows tightly, but this killer's reach was there too. Whenever he wanted, at whatever time he wanted, and into whichever house he wanted, he would enter. He didn't have any special weapon, just an axe. But that axe brought a message of death. The first incident was reported in May 1918. A shopkeeper and his wife were attacked in the dark of night. Both were seriously injured but somehow survived. The police considered this incident a common robbery, but no one had estimated that this was the beginning of the coming storm. A few days later, a second incident occurred, and then a third. Each time the method was the same: breaking a window or a door to get inside, striking with an axe, and then disappearing. No evidence, no trace, as if the killer would dissolve into thin air. Newspapers began printing prominent news of these attacks. The city's people were scared. Everyone was talking about who the killer was, where he lived, and whose home would be the next target. Some people declared him insane. Some said it was some personal enmity, but no one could understand the reality. For the police, this case became a puzzle. There were no witnesses, no evidence, and the killer would do his work under the cover of darkness and disappear each time. The city's atmosphere changed. The streets became deserted at night. In a city famous for jazz music and night gatherings, fear now ruled. Mothers would tell their children to go to sleep early and close the windows. Fathers began guarding outside their homes. But everyone knew that if the man with the axe came, there was probably no hope of survival. Fear was hidden behind every door. The shadow of death loomed behind every window. In June 1918, an incident occurred that shook the entire city. A family was attacked at night. The husband and wife were mercilessly struck with an axe. Blood was spread all over the room. The children were crying, and the killer had disappeared somewhere. The police conducted investigations, but the same result: nothing. No fingerprints, no footprints, nothing at all. Just a house, bathed in blood. People began to say that this was not a human, but a ghost. Some even started to believe it was the spirit of the devil. Now rumors began to spread rapidly in the city. Some said the killer was a common laborer who got lost in the crowd during the day and came as a shadow at night. Some believed that it was a person who hated music and noise, which is why he looked for his prey in the silence of the night. Some even said that this killer was not an ordinary human, but a mysterious monster that could change shape and then disappear. But the reality was that fear was growing and no one was safe. In October 1918, another horrifying incident came to light. A young girl was attacked. She survived in an injured state and told that she saw a shadow in the dark that came in through the window and then struck her with an axe. Neighbors came running at her screams, but the killer had already disappeared. This testimony increased people's fear even more. Everyone knew that the killer was one person and he was roaming free. Now every night was a torment. Every door and every window seemed like a gate to death. The police increased patrols in the city. Guards were posted in every neighborhood, but it was of no use. The killer kept attacking at his will. He was outsmarting the police as if he knew exactly when and where the guard was weak. It seemed as if he was watching everyone. His intelligence and planning surprised everyone. No one knew when and where he would strike. It was only certain that he would definitely return. These attacks on homes in the darkness of the night were now becoming a routine. People had become fearful even during the day. This was not a terror confined to one area, but had descended upon the entire New Orleans. New incidents were being added to the police records with each passing week, and each time it was estimated that the attacker was the same one. He would commit his crimes in his signature style and then disappear as if the earth had split open and he had been absorbed into it. Many people had begun to understand that perhaps the killer had extensive knowledge of the city's internal routes, alleys, and hiding places. Some believed he was a local person who lived among people, mingled with everyone, and appeared in his true form at night. Suspicion began to grow in people's hearts. Someone would suspect their neighbor, someone their colleague. The bond of trust in the city was beginning to break. One incident shook everyone to the core. An Italian family, who ran a small grocery store, was sleeping at home when suddenly the killer broke down the door, forced his way inside, and attacked them with an axe. 2 members of the family were killed on the spot, while 1 child survived. That child, drenched in blood, trembling with fear, later told the police that he had seen a heavy-set man who disappeared into the darkness. This child's testimony proved that the killer was human, yet people were still not ready to accept him as one after the murder of this family. The police made a list of suspects across the entire city. Many people were arrested, but no evidence could be found. Some people were presented in court, but it couldn't be proven there either that they were the killer. Each time the police failed, and each failure further increased the fear of the city's people. Now people began to think that perhaps this killer would never be caught. Newspapers also played their part in amplifying this fear. Headlines appeared daily. Another attack by the Axeman. New Orleans is no longer safe. The killer strikes again. People were terrified of the morning newspaper because they feared that perhaps someone they knew or a neighbor had become the victim the previous night. Another strange thing was that the killer was mostly targeting families of Italian descent. He primarily targeted small shopkeepers and their families. Because of this, rumors began to spread that perhaps the killer was doing all this due to some personal enmity or racism. Some people said it was the result of mafia disputes, but the police had no evidence for this either. During this time, a letter was received by the newspapers that gave the whole story an even more horrifying twist. The letter stated that the killer called himself an inhabitant of hell. He claimed he was not human, but a demonic entity that had come to Earth to punish people. In this letter, he also set a strange condition. He said that on a specific night, any house that played jazz music would be spared. The houses that resonated with music would be safe. But those who remained silent would not be saved from the blows of his axe. When this letter was published in the newspaper, a strange scene unfolded across the city. On the night specified by the killer, sounds of jazz music echoed from every house in New Orleans. Music was playing everywhere, in the streets, neighborhoods, and shops. Everyone resorted to music to save their lives. That night, indeed, no one was attacked, but all this was proof that the killer was not only successful in terrifying people, but had also taken control of their minds. For the police, this situation had become a joke. People began to say that the police were failures and only the killer was controlling this game. Some even said that perhaps the police and the killer were connected, which is why he was never caught. Public anger was growing, but fear was more dominant than that anger. Then another incident poured oil on the fire. A woman was attacked while she was sleeping in her room. She was struck several times with an axe, but she miraculously survived. When she gave her statement to the police, she said she had seen the attacker running away, but he was so fast she couldn't recognize him. Her words once again gave birth to the rumor that perhaps the killer was not human, but some supernatural creature. Now, everyone in the city began staying awake at night. Some people kept weapons in their homes, some stood guard, but the killer still kept succeeding. As he wished, wherever he wished, he would choose his victim. The police and the public were helpless. This was the time when the streets of New Orleans became known for screams of fear instead of their music. People looked at each other with suspicion even during the day. Everyone thought that perhaps their neighbor was the man with the axe. Time was passing, but the fear of the axeman was increasing instead of diminishing. Every night, a new story was born. Every morning, a new fear was hidden in the newspaper headlines. People would console each other, but deep down, Everyone was convinced that this killer would never be caught. Now, the atmosphere of New Orleans was testifying to terror and death. Instead of music, NJOY.AS 1919 began. The series of attacks became even more dangerous. A young couple was attacked while they were sleeping in their bedroom. They were struck so many times that their faces became difficult to recognize. The police arrived at the crime scene, but as always, there was no clear evidence there. Just an axe, which the killer often left inside the house, as if he wanted to say that he could hide any trace if he wished, and if he wished, he could deliberately provide proof of his presence. This fact baffled the police even more. Why would any killer do this? Ordinary killers never leave any mark of their identity, but this axeman often left the weapon behind. Some police officers believed he did this intentionally to create more fear among the city's people. He wanted to show that he would escape every time, even if everyone knew he had used an axe. Now, various kinds of stories began to circulate among people. Some said the killer roamed during the day in the guise of a common laborer or shopkeeper and showed his true face at night. Some said the killer was an escaped prisoner from some jail who had decided to take revenge. But the most terrifying rumor was that this killer was not a human, but an evil spirit that was influenced by jazz music. This was why, when the entire city had played music, there had been no murder that night. An old woman even claimed that she had seen a strange shadow passing by her window, which was not in human form. She said it was a devil that roamed in the darkness. Although the police dismissed such talk as mere fear and superstition, the reality was that no one could stop the killer. In March 1919, an incident occurred that made the killer a permanent part of history. A family, which was of Italian descent and had been living in New Orleans for many years, was sleeping in their home when the killer entered. He mercilessly wielded the axe on the entire family. When people gathered in the morning, the scene was unbelievable. Blood was scattered everywhere. The walls, the floor, everything was red. But the surprising thing was that the house's piano was standing intact. Some witnesses said that faint sounds of jazz music had been heard from a nearby neighborhood that night. After this incident, people became even more convinced that the killer was connected to music, and perhaps he was a musician himself. Newspapers presented this murder in an even more horrifying manner. The headline read, "The Axeman strikes again. Can anyone stop him?" People read the newspaper and looked at each other. Everyone was terrified, but curiosity was also growing in some people about who he really was. Some young men even started saying that if they encountered the killer, they would definitely confront him. But the reality was that no one had been able to stand up to him. At that time, another interesting thing happened in the city. Some shops started putting up signs on their windows that read, "We are playing jazz music, safe from the Axeman." This was both a joke and a reality. People really started playing music in their homes so the killer wouldn't come near them. The entire city was trapped in a strange game. The killer would give an order, and the whole city would obey it. The police investigations were failing repeatedly. Some suspects were arrested, but none could be proven to be the real killer. One man was even sentenced by the court, but it was later discovered that he was innocent. The killer's attacks continued, and the police were embarrassed every time. Public trust in the police had vanished. Now, people were adopting their own methods to protect themselves. Someone would guard their door, someone would sleep with a gun in their room. But the killer would enter whenever and wherever he wanted. In July 1919, another major incident occurred. A young woman was attacked when she was alone. She was struck on the head several times, but somehow survived. In her injured state, she stated that the killer was very powerful. She hadn't seen his face properly, but felt he was a person like an ordinary laborer. Her statement started a new debate. People began to say that the killer was perhaps a man who works in front of everyone during the day, but becomes a symbol of fear for everyone at night. Another terrifying habit of the killer was that he didn't just attack. He also played mind games with people. He would leave his weapon behind, sometimes leave a mark, and sometimes a letter. He wanted people to keep fearing him, to keep talking about him. And the reality was that the entire city was in his grip. New Orleans was a living city, but now it began to feel like a graveyard, where everyone was waiting for their doom. By the summer of 1919, New Orleans had become a city that seemed normal by day, but filled with terror at night. In the daylight, the streets were bustling with activity. Shops were open, children were playing, but as soon as the sun set, people would hide in their homes. Windows shut, doors locked tight, and hearts immersed in fear. Everyone prayed that the night would pass safely, and they would see their loved ones alive in the morning. But the killer showed no signs of stopping point one night. A couple was sleeping in their home. Suddenly, a noise was heard, the door was broken down, and within moments, the echoes of axe blows rang out. The husband was killed on the spot, and the wife was left severely wounded. Drenched in blood, the woman screamed for help, calling out to the neighbors. When people arrived, the killer had disappeared once again. Only an axe was left there, as if he had deliberately left this evidence. The woman told the police that the killer was tall and powerful, but it was impossible to see his face in the dark. This statement was a clue for the police, yet nothing was proven. After this incident, a new debate erupted in the city. People began to say that perhaps the killer was targeting a specific community. In most cases, families of Italian descent were being targeted. These discussions reached the newspapers, and reporters raised the question in their reports. Was this all the work of a secret organization or the mafia? But the method and style the killer used were very different from ordinary criminals. His attacks were filled with cruelty, yet a demonic calm was also evident in them. The pressure on the police was mounting. The city's people had lost confidence in the police. Protests began. People shouted, asking why the killer wasn't being caught. But the police had no answers. No matter how hard they tried, the killer would slip from their grasp. It was as if he was always one step ahead. In August 1919, a letter arrived at the newspaper office that shook everyone to the core. This letter was from the killer. He called himself an inhabitant of hell. The letter stated that he was not human, but a demonic force. He said no one could catch him because he was made not of flesh and bone, but of spirit. He warned people that on a specific night, he would cast his shadow over the city. But those who played jazz music that night would be safe. He said in clear words, "If your house is filled with the tunes of music, I will not enter there. But if you remain silent, you will not escape my axe." As soon as this letter was published in the newspapers, a commotion spread throughout the entire city. Everyone was terrified, but at the same time, a strange enthusiasm also emerged. When the appointed night arrived, every home, every shop, every alley in New Orleans was resonating with the sounds of jazz music. Some people played the piano, some turned on record players, and some even started playing bands on the streets. The entire city was immersed in music. It was a scene unlike any ever witnessed before. Everyone was using music as their shield to save their lives. And amazingly, no murder occurred that night. People breathed a sigh of relief, but with it, fear grew even more. Now everyone was convinced that the killer was not just a human, but something else. Because how was it possible that no murder occurred in the entire city that night? This event was preserved in history. An entire city of New Orleans was at the mercy of music for one night. After this, the killer continued his attacks, but he would also disappear occasionally. For months, no murders would occur, and people would start to think that perhaps he had left. But then he would suddenly return and destroy another family. This game was like a terrifying play with no end in sight. In October 1919, another family was attacked. A man and his wife were struck with an axe. The wife died on the spot, but the husband survived in a severely wounded condition. He told the police that the killer came very quietly, as if he knew exactly where to enter. He was shrouded in darkness and was striking so fast it was hard to comprehend. This statement confused everyone once again. Who was this killer? Where did he come from? And most importantly, why would he suddenly disappear for days at a time? Some people said he must be killing in other cities too. Some said he was an ordinary person who lived a normal life by day to hide his crimes. But everyone was certain that he was very clever. He was superior to everyone, not just physically, but mentally as well. By now, the city's people were starting to go mad. Some had turned their homes into fortresses. Some had sent their children to other cities. But many couldn't even leave the city. Their businesses, their families, their lives were all here. They were forced to live under the shadow of fear. New Orleans was no longer just a city of jazz and fragrances. It had become a place where death could knock at any time. The killer's letter had proven that he didn't just take people's lives, but he also occupied their minds. He was playing a game, and the entire city had become his toys. The police were helpless, the public was terrified, and the killer was free. It was a horrifying nightmare that showed no sign of ending. By the end of 1919, the people of New Orleans were beginning to break down psychologically. The fear that they could be next had settled into every home. Businesses operated in the daylight. Markets remained open, but as soon as the sun set, the entire city would sink into silence. Boards were nailed over windows, multiple locks were on the doors, and people trembled in the darkness. This was not just a physical threat, but a psychological war in which everyone was being defeated. The police, for their part, began taking strict measures. Patrols in the streets were increased. Informants were paid to keep an eye on suspicious people, yet the killer would still strike at will and escape. One thing was common in his operations. He always used an axe as a weapon, and often this axe belonged to the victim's family itself. It was as if he used the objects present in people's homes against them, further humiliating them. This action reflected his psychological game. In most cases, the killer would break a window or a door to enter, but this was done so quietly that people would only wake up when the axe began to fall upon them. The victims were often found in their beds, drenched in blood. This fact terrified people even more because now even sleep was no longer safe for them. During this time, the newspapers fanned the flames of the matter. Headlines appeared every day. Another family murdered. The axe killer is free. When will this bloody game end? Reporters republished the killer's letter multiple times, and some even suggested that perhaps a reporter from the newspaper itself had written the letter to spread sensation. But the common people did not believe these debates. For them, the reality was that people around them were dying, and the killer was free. The police got another lead when, in one case, a neighbor reported seeing a tall man near the house, wrapped in black clothes. But as soon as the neighbor approached, the man disappeared into the darkness. This statement is in the police records, yet no arrest could be made. Some people even began claiming that they had seen a shadowy figure roaming the streets at night. An old woman said the person was standing in the shadows of the trees, as if suspended in the air, not on the ground. These claims could certainly have been the result of fear and superstition, but the fear that had spread through the city was no less real. Now, different theories about the killer began to emerge. Some said he was part of the gang. Some believed he was a mentally ill person who only hunted at night. But one group insisted that he wasn't even human. His letter, his cunning, and his disappearances all pointed towards a supernatural being. During this time, an incident occurred that further increased people's suspicions. One night, a family was attacked, but amazingly, everyone survived. They reported that the killer tried to attack them, but as soon as the gramophone in their house was turned on and a jazz tune started playing, the killer suddenly stopped. He cast a shadow on the wall for a moment and then vanished into the darkness. Upon hearing this account, everyone began recalling the letter in which the killer had said he would spare those who played music. This incident proved that whether the killer was human or something else, he strictly adhered to his rules of the game. He wanted people to play music according to his command. It was as if the entire city had become a part of his game. The conflict between the police and the public grew. The police wanted people to believe in rational explanations, but for the public, this was all beyond reason. Everyone was living in the shadow of fear. Some even began to say that if this series didn't stop, the city would be emptied to the end of the same year. Another bloody incident occurred. The killer attacked a butcher and his wife. The wife was killed on the spot, but the butcher survived despite his wounds. When asked what he had seen, he only said he wasn't human. Fire was burning in his eyes. Upon hearing this statement, many people screamed, but the police dismissed it as merely the effect of shock. However, the idea that the killer truly wasn't human settled into the hearts of the public. Now New Orleans was no longer just a city of murders, but had become a place where reality and fear had merged. The killer was as if playing a game. He wanted people to only think about him, to fear him, and to obey his command. And that is exactly what was happening. He had taken control of the entire city. No night passed peacefully. No heart was without fear. And the most frightening thing was that no one knew when this series would end or if it would ever end at all. By the beginning of 1920, New Orleans was living in a strange state of conflict. On one hand, efforts were being made to restore the city's life to normalcy. Markets were opening, music clubs were resonating. But on the other hand, the fear that the Axeman killer could return at any moment was alive in every heart. This fear was present everywhere like a shadow. The killer's mysterious presence was no longer just that of a murderer. It had transformed into a mythological terror. Children would ask their elders, "Will the Axeman come tonight?" And mothers would reassure them, but they themselves would stay awake at night. Some people still claimed to have seen a shadowy figure in the dark, standing by a window, staring at them. But as soon as a light was lit, it would disappear. The police investigation expanded in several directions. There was some suspicion that the killer belonged to the Italian community, as most of the victims were from among them. Based on this theory, several Italians were arrested and interrogated, but no solid evidence was found. Each time the police failed, and the killer would take another life. During this time, another incident occurred in the city that shocked everyone. The killer attacked a young woman, but she miraculously survived. She reported that when the killer raised the axe to strike her head, suddenly the sound of a trumpet came from the street. Upon hearing the jazz tune, the killer paused for a moment and then vanished into the darkness. Upon hearing this account, the entire city once again recalled the letter in which the killer had set the condition of playing jazz music. Now, this was turning into a conviction that he was not merely human, but his spirit was connected to some demonic power. Jazz music was the identity of New Orleans, but now it was no longer just music. It had become a shield between life and death. Clubs began to fill up more than before. Jazz started playing in every street. It was as if the entire city was challenging the killer. "We will keep playing music, and you can do nothing to us." But deep down, everyone knew this peace was temporary. Some people proposed the theory that the killer might have been a musician himself, someone so connected to jazz that he had made it his symbol. Some said he was a mad musician who channeled his demonic power through music. But these were all just speculations. In mid-1920, another horrific murder occurred. A family was sleeping when the killer attacked their home. The mother and father were killed, but their young son survived. When asked what he had seen, he said, "He came in the dark. He had an axe, but his feet weren't touching the ground. He was floating." Upon hearing this statement, people trembled. These words from a child's mouth further amplified the city's fear. Now the relationship between the public and the police worsened further. People said the police were deliberately not catching the killer. Some even said that perhaps the police knew who he was, but couldn't stop him. The police strongly denied these allegations, but their failures continued to fuel public anger. Some astrologers and spiritual leaders came to the forefront. They claimed they could know about the killer. One woman said the killer was not an ordinary human, but an evil spirit that someone had set free through a curse. According to her, it would remain active only until its spirit was re-imprisoned. But these talks found no place in the police records, as they had no scientific evidence. During this time, a strange event occurred in the city. One night, people sitting in a jazz club saw a shadow outside the window. The shadow stood there for a few moments. Then, as soon as the music grew louder, it disappeared. People ran, screamed, but when the police arrived, they found nothing. This incident, too, was added to the rumors, and the fear of the killer grew even more. By the end of 1920, the killer's attacks began to decrease. He suddenly disappeared, as if he had never existed. But his fear remained. People said he was gone, but some believed he was still here, waiting for another time to reappear. The people of New Orleans kept playing jazz, but the question remained alive in their hearts. Has the killer really left? Or is he still hiding in the shadows, searching for his next victim? The killer's disappearance itself became a mystery. No arrest was made, no trial was held, no sentence was given. He vanished just as he had appeared. But the stories, the fear, and the conspiracy theories he left behind became a permanent part of the city. The people of New Orleans knew that a chapter had been written among them that would never truly end. Because whenever the darkness of night fell, and whenever an axe gleamed, they would all remember that same fear. The Axeman killer is still alive somewhere. The year 1921 had arrived, but for the people of New Orleans, time seemed to have stopped. The killer's attacks had decreased, but the city's fear remained. This silence felt strange to everyone. People wondered if he had truly left, or if he was merely waiting, like a hunter giving its prey time to tire before striking again. The newspapers were still keeping the story alive. An article was published every other week. Would the Axeman return? Reporters would mention the old crimes and reprint the killer's letter. Some journalists had even started claiming openly that he was killing in another city, but his true identity was still a secret. The police also had no new leads. Several officers recommended closing the case, but public pressure kept preventing them from doing so. People wanted an answer, no matter how terrifying it might be. During this time, some new incidents reawakened the old terror in people's hearts. One night, bloodstains were found outside a house in one part of the city, but there was no body inside. There were only marks of an axe on the floor, as if someone had dragged it. The police searched the entire area, but found nothing. This news spread through the entire city like wildfire. People began to say the killer had returned. A few days later, another terrifying event occurred. A shopkeeper reported that he had heard a noise in his store at night. When he went inside, he saw a broken window and an axe lying on the floor, but no one was there. Upon hearing this news, the city was once again submerged in fear. Some people started saying that all this was beyond human capability. According to them, the Axeman was merely a spirit that appeared here and there. Some said he was actually the devil of New Orleans, who could be stopped by the sound of music but not completely destroyed. Now, various theories began to spread among the public. Some became convinced that the killer was dead, and now only his spirit was tormenting people. Some believed he had gone to another city to kill. But in everyone's heart was the fear that he could return at any moment. Around the same time, an astonishing rumor spread throughout the city. It was said that a man had seen the killer. This man claimed he was walking down a dark alley when he saw a tall shadow. He said he had an axe in his hand, and there was a strange smile on his face, as if he knew I was watching him, but he wanted me to stay alive and tell others that he is still here. This rumor began to drive people mad again. The police interrogated the man, but he couldn't provide anything more than a statement. According to him, the killer did not attack, just stood there and then disappeared into the darkness. Now the people of New Orleans became divided into two groups. Some said it was all superstition, that the killer was gone, and only fear remained. But the other group believed he was still alive and just waiting for the right time. An interesting thing was that jazz music had become more popular in the city than ever before. People believed it was their means of protection. Music clubs began to fill up. Jazz played at every gathering. But some people said this was the killer's victory. He had made people dance to his tune, and they were still a part of his game. At the end of 1921, another incident occurred that made the story even more mysterious. A young woman was alone in her house. She told the police that she saw a shadow at the window, then heard footsteps outside the door. But as soon as she turned on her gramophone and jazz began to play, the sound stopped. In the morning, when she went outside, an axe was placed near her door. The police also witnessed this scene with their own eyes, but no killer was found. This incident was the last time the Axeman signs were seen in New Orleans. After that, he suddenly disappeared, as if he had never existed. But his fear lived on. People still say today that he is spiritually present in the city, and whenever the silence of night descends, the sound of his footsteps can still be heard. The Axeman became the most mysterious chapter in the history of New Orleans. A killer who didn't just take lives, but made an entire city a prisoner of his fear. And even today, when the faint sound of jazz comes from an old building's window, people tremble and wonder, Is this music saving us? Or is it reminding us of the killer? By the beginning of 1922, New Orleans appeared to be returning to its normal life once again. Markets began to open, people started going out at night, and jazz gatherings became even more vibrant than before. Yet, despite all this, a fear still lingered. The fear that the killer could return at any moment. The Axeman's mysterious disappearance was creating even more questions in people's minds. Was he caught? Did he die? Or was he truly a demonic force that would reappear when the time was right? There were no answers to these questions, but the stories continued to grow in the newspapers. A new article will be published every other month. Someone wrote that the killer was now in other cities. Someone claimed he was actually a policeman who, with the help of his colleagues, kept escaping. Some even said he was a musician who loved jazz and used it to justify his madness. But one thing was clear to all. The killer had not just committed physical murders. He had struck at the very soul of the entire city. He had taken control of an entire society. People began to live by his rules, changing their lives according to his conditions. He wanted music to play everywhere, and that is exactly what happened. New Orleans remains a city of jazz to this day, and many people attribute this to the Axeman. A few years later, when people had become somewhat more at ease, the old murder files still remained in the police records. These files contained photographs, details of blood-soaked rooms, and statements from surviving victims. But there was not a single piece of evidence in these files that revealed the killer's true identity. This case became a permanent mystery. An interesting aspect is that the Axeman never committed robbery. He never entered a home for money or valuables. His only purpose was murder, and this fact sets him apart from ordinary criminals. He wanted people to be afraid. He wanted the city to tremble at his name, and he succeeded in his goal. Even years later, when people recall that era, fear is visible in their eyes. Older generations tell their children and grandchildren, "We lived through a time when even sleep was not safe, when the Axeman could break down the door and enter at any moment." Some researchers have tried to uncover his true identity. Some said he was a man who had lost his mental balance. Some said he was a serial killer who also committed crimes in other cities. But despite all these theories, no definitive conclusion was reached. The most terrifying thing is that even after this, similar incidents occurred in different parts of the world where people were murdered in their sleep and the killer used an axe. Each time, the question arose, is this merely a copycat, or has the real Axeman come back to life? The people of New Orleans still tell this story today. When tunes play in jazz clubs, someone always says this line, "These are the very tunes that saved us from the Axeman." And everyone falls silent for a moment. The Axeman of New Orleans was not just a killer. He is a legend, a terrifying chapter that will never end. He is a reminder that sometimes fear is more powerful than a physical presence. He lives on in people's memories, in their dreams, and in their music. Did he really die? Or is he still hiding in the shadows, waiting for his next victim? This question may never be answered. But one thing is certain. Whenever someone walks alone through the streets of New Orleans at night, and the faint clink of an axe is heard in the distance, hearts tremble. People still say to each other, "Don't stay silent. Play music, because if silence falls, he might return." This is the phrase that taught an entire city to live with fear. And this is the reality that transformed the Axeman from an ordinary killer into an endless, terrifying story. The Axeman remains a mystery. Perhaps he will always remain one. But his shadow still lies over New Orleans, a shadow from which there is only one escape: music.